All right. Well, today we have another amazing guest on the podcast, Don Ladolcetta. He is an author of two amazing books, Brooklyn Tell and Hannah the Lighthouse Girl of Newfoundland. So, welcome to the podcast, Don. We're excited to have you.
Thank you very, very much. I'm delighted to be here.
Perfect. All right. Well, let's talk about your books. What inspired you to write these two books?
I was never planning on being an author. That was never in my agenda of life. If you looked at my grade school grades for English and grammar and things, I certainly, weren't looking like I was going to be a great author, if you will. I would be a B and a C student in English and grammar, etc. But came the COVID pandemic, and I am locked in the house for COVID, and I'm going nuts because I feel cabin fever. And my youngest son, he's on the phone. He said, "Dad, stop moaning. Why don't you do something creative? You have all these great stories that Grandma used to tell you. Why don't you write a book with her stories in it?" Now, Grandma is my mother, who
Okay.
grew up at a lighthouse in the cold waters of Newfoundland.
Oh,
And
wow.
my grandfather was the lighthouse keeper, and they lived in this isolated place. And Newfoundland is chock full of very Irish kind of people. They have their own culture, and there was a lot to write about. So I wrote about the culture, history, genealogy, humor, folk music. I wrote a book about a little girl, age 9, my mother, Hannah, growing up and coming of age until she finally, marries. And the book got published. I was shocked. A small publisher picked it up and said, "This is a great book. We're going to publish you." And so now I've got this lovely book about my mother, which is selling. I've sold 2,000 copies so far.
Nice.
And when I go and make book presentations and, "Hey, here's my book," and people say, "What's your next book? What's your next book? Oh, you got to do another book. What's your?" So even though I never planned to write the first one, I got corralled into writing the second one, which was A Brooklyn Tale. Now, why A Brooklyn Tale? Well, I wrote a good book about my mother's family history. And I said, well, I have a father who has a great family history. And so my great grandparents were living in Italy in the late 1800s, early 1900s. There were terrible, tough times going on there. And so at that time, my great grandparents packed up and took a ship to America. They went through Ellis Island, and they settled in Brooklyn, in an Italian community in Brooklyn, and live that life of the Italian immigrant trying to make the American dream. So that's what my second book was about, simply because the first book went well. I knew the styling, the styling of the first book and the styling of the second book are very, very similar. You start with what happened earlier, and then we move on. There's fiction built in. 75% of both books are true.
Nice.
And then I needed to make them interesting, so I added a little fiction, typical stories of the area, typical stories of the period, but I shoved them into the book to kind of make the book flow better. So my second book, A Brooklyn Tale, is a function of my dad's story. But being a writer, never on the list, but I'm getting great reviews. So I guess maybe it was in the cards. I just didn't know it.
Oh, and it is. I have the book. I've got it tagged. It was a great book. I really enjoyed reading it. I
Thank you.
loved for me, I love pictures. So, you've got all these wonderful pictures in there, and you could just see your family's immigration story the way you wrote it. It really told the struggles that they went through coming over to America when he had to go into quarantine, and it was rough
There are a
times.
lot of challenges. People don't realize it. When you come to America for the first time, you're not accepted.
Yeah.
Of course, the English were here. I guess the Dutch were here first, and then the English. But after that, the Europeans that came through were not necessarily appreciated, and so the ones that arrived really struggled and had a challenge. But everybody makes it, don't they?
They do, yep. But it's great to have these stories like this book that you wrote so that we can remember the struggles our ancestors came through. So
Fantastic. I'm so glad you appreciated the book.
I did. I loved it. It was great. Yeah. So give us a little bit of I don't want you to give away the book or anything, but maybe give us a little synopsis of a Brooklyn Tale for the listeners.
Okay, so a lot of people don't realize that all these Italians that came over from Italy had a real economic reason for coming. Um, There was incredible, and most of them are from Southern Italy.
Yeah.
You don't find too many immigrants coming from Northern Italy because they were making nickels. They were doing well up there in Milan and Venice. They had money. But the Southern Italians, especially where my grandparents came from, Calabria for grandpa and Sicily for grandma, they had economic problems. They were peasants, still kind of surviving from the feudal system. They didn't have a whole lot of things going to them. The nobility or the guys in charge were kind of cruel and mean in terms of the way they abused these people. They were starving, and then of course in the early 1900s. There was a great, gigantic earthquake in Sicily that affected the whole area, and of course that earthquake devastated everything. There was an intense amount of famine, and so the choice was stay here and starve, or go to America where everybody says the streets are paved in gold. So I had one grandparent was a merchant seaman, so to him it was pretty much an easy thing to arrange to bring his family to America, but he still had to do it piecemeal. He couldn't do it all at once. It was a very expensive ordeal. So he would bring one child, then he would bring a parent, and then he would bring another child. That was the typical standard for coming to America, and that also worked for the other side of the family. The other grandparent. They themselves were just farmers, peasant farmers, starving to death, experiencing the not just peasant farmers, there were also laborers, but they experienced the earthquake and realized that, boy, we got to get out of town. So they arranged a passage in the holes of a ship, and I'm sure you've heard stories about the horrendous conditions. The steerage, it was called steerage. The part of the ship was down below, and if you were poor and you paid a few bucks, you got a trip to America. But the trip was like in a communal rooms. You'd share your beds with 100, 200, 300 people in the same room. It was dark. It was dank. There was a lot of illness and sickness and challenge. And the trip across the ocean was a big ordeal for these people. Seasickness and, so a couple of weeks on the boat, they're really anxious because they don't know what the future holds. They don't have a whole lot of money in their pocket. And they come to America, and of course they have to go through Ellis Island, which was the way everybody who came to America arrived in this country. And Ellis Island was also a challenging experience. There were cases. One of my favorite stories is Beware of the Button Hook Man.
Yeah.
For people who are listening, back in the day, the American customs or the American immigration people were concerned about Italians coming in with disease. And one of the biggest diseases they were bringing in was a disease of the eye. And it was very contagious. So when a person arrived in Ellis Island, they had to go through a physical to make sure they were sick. But one of the nastier aspects of the physical was the eye exam. Now, in the case of the eye exam, they needed to pull back the skin of your eyelid so they could see all around in there. So they had this metal tool that looked like a button hook. In the old days, the Victorian times, you needed a device to pull your button through the buttonhole. So it looked like a button hook, but it really wasn't a button hook. It was basically an L-shaped instrument made of metal. And they would slip a piece of that L under the eyelid and yank it open. It was pretty much painful, very, very painful experience. And nobody knew to expect this. And my grandfather on the boat, was not feeling so good, and his rubbing his eyes, and one of the fellow passengers on the boat said, "Beware of the button hook man." And the kid didn't like, what's he talking about? And then sure enough, when he went through the processing, they yanked his eyeball back, found that he had a disease, and they quarantined him. A very challenging moment. But of course, they all survived that. They arrived in town, and they created a life for themselves.
That part, and I had never heard the button hook man until I read your book. And that part, I was like, that poor little, was it Anthony?
Yes, Grandpa.
Grandpa. I was like, that poor baby. Oh my gosh. It gave me shivers.
But there were other aspects. I mean, they were pretty. They were afraid that the immigrants would be dirty,
Yeah.
and they were required to shower Okay. And a lot of these immigrants, in the case of my ancestors, they lived in, dirt floor, wooden homes. They didn't have indoor plumbing. A shower was like an unknown to them, but they were, forced to learn the new mechanics of a shower, and of course you have to take off your clothes for the world to do this. It felt very uncomfortable to them.
Yeah.
Um, and there's another story in there where the matrons wanted great grandma to shower, and so they said take your clothes off, and grandma was afraid because no one knew she had taken a few dollars that she had saved before coming to America, and she
Yeah.
stowed those dollars into the hem of her dress. So her dress was basically her safe, the place where she
Yep.
kept the money. And they wanted her to take the dress off, and she was thinking that she was going to get robbed. She put up a big fight not to get into that shower because she was afraid once she parted with her dress, the money would disappear.
That was everything that she had.
Correct. Every dollar she had. And when you came to America, you needed everything because you started with nothing.
Another aspect of your book that I really loved is we always hear about the boat ride over, the ship ride or whatever, through the eyes of our Italian ancestors. But what I loved was it was your grandfather's father was the merchant seaman, right?
Correct.
And we were able to see it through his eyes, which I thought was really cool because we saw where in the steerage, where our ancestors went, but he knew what it looked like for first class and second class
Yeah.
passengers. And I thought that was really interesting because you could see the luxury, a little bit less luxury, and then he sadly knew where his family was going to be. And so it was just a really cool perspective to see that trip through his eyes.
Yeah, my great grandfather came from a long line of seamen that was out of Calabria. The Calabrians were known for their seafaring people, and he
Yeah.
knew exactly what the boats were like compared to what first class was. Who lived in first class who came to America? They were like cruise ship passengers.
Oh,
We've all been
yeah.
on cruise ships. Good food, good fresh air. Relaxing rooms and relaxing places, but not for the people down below. The people down below were living like not necessarily slaves, but close to it. Living on bunks, and water was seeping in because they were very, very low decks. There was a big stark difference that the merchant seamen got to see.
Yep. Yeah, it was just cool to see that. And for him, in his head he knew that that's how his family was going to come over, but it was still worth the trip for them
Oh
and
yeah,
for him to bring his family over compared to what they were living in.
and where they came from, which was abject poverty, to
Yeah.
where all their ancestors, I'm sorry, descendants, I'm a descendant, to where all their descendants live today. My God, today, I'm not a super, super rich, but life is good. I've got
Yeah.
food on the table and a roof over my head, and I'm breathing fresh air. We really, it's a success story when you leave a place like that to come to America.
Yep, exactly. And if our ancestors are watching over us right now, they're glad they made the sacrifice.
Oh, big time, big
For
time.
sure.
I wish they were alive. In fact, after writing the books, this is both my mother's book, who passed away she passed away before the book was written, and my father's book, who also passed away long ago. After having written the book, I kept saying to myself, God, I wish I could have had them read this. They'd be so proud of this. It's so sad that they didn't get a chance to see what I did about their lives.
I
It's
know.
a little bit of a tear to my eye.
Oh, for sure. I interviewed another gentleman one time and he talked about how and this always stuck with me, how when our ancestors came over, they never thought that 3, 4 generations later we would be sitting down writing their story and
Oh,
talking about
absolutely.
them.
Oh, have you written their story? Have you written your ancestors?
I have not. So this podcast takes a lot for me, but
I'm
it
sure.
is on my list of things to do.
Well, it's actually a lot of fun. It's frustrating as well because
Yeah.
you'll sit there and you remember. I remember Dad telling me once about X, and I said, "Boy, I need more details about X. I really want to make X a big part of the book." Oh, wow! I wish like there's a part in the book. My dad grew up with a person who became famous later in life. His name was Royal Dano. Royal Dano became a movie star in Hollywood. He played character parts, bit parts. Everybody has seen this guy on screen. You probably don't know the name, but you've seen him on screen. His most important role was Mr. Lincoln in a movie, and I can't remember the exact name of the movie, but his voice was so noticeable in Mr. Lincoln that Walt Disney Company took Royal Dano's voice and used Royal Dano's voice in the presentation of the Hall of the Presidents. When Abraham Lincoln stands up, the robot, the animatronic stands up, the voice you hear is the voice of Royal Dano, my father's friend. Now, my dad used to tell me and Royal, we would act together, and me and Royal would hang out together. Well, what if I remember 500 words of that? And I want to put that in the book where it's a substantial, at least a reasonably substantial part of the book. So what do I need? 5 or 10,000 words. So I wish, like the things that I knew, or the pieces that I knew from my father, that he could have been around for me. Dad, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. So
Yeah.
in that scenario, I had to, remember I told you 25% of the book is fictitious. I have to, fill in the blanks to what my imagination would take me with my dad in those scenarios, especially with the Royal Dano sequence. When he was
Yeah.
about 10, 12 years old, they used to hang out and they used to get into mischief together because that's what you did in Brooklyn as a kid.
That's cool. Yeah, it's hard. I've only done this, I think we're on like 70 some episodes, and we've only done my papa. So my grandfather, I called him Papa. My mom and I told his story. And it was probably the hardest story for me to do. I research Italian Americans that I'm not related to, and I put their life story together and I tell their story. Well, I know my grandfather's story, my papa's story. Like I should be able to sit down and tell that. It was the hardest script to write because you I don't know why it's so hard. I think kind of like what you said, you know the story but you don't, and
Yes.
it's just hard. It was amazing, but it was hard.
I had to tap into the brains of my brother and cousins in the Italian family. Do you remember this? Do you remember that? Can you shed this light on this? And can you? And yeah, I did get a lot of help from them. I also got some kind of oddball feedback because when you make up a story about Uncle Charlie, whose son is Jeff, and then Jeff reads the book and he said that story didn't happen. But yeah, I had to put in some fill in the blanks there, Jeff. So sometimes they don't necessarily like the outcome. They don't dislike it. They don't dislike it. They just say, "Come on, that was a big fat lie." Well, okay, well, what can I say? I needed filler.
I
Okay,
needed filler.
so
Yeah,
like
I
I
did that
said,
too. I asked ants to help me out for my podcast.
basically I took every fact I knew and wrote it down. Every fact I knew and wrote it down, and then I elaborated it. So
Yeah.
let's say that your fact was that your grandfather loved the dish of anchovies and breadcrumbs. Okay, I knew that he'd scarf that up, an anchovies and breadcrumbs dish. Well, I had to make 10 pages out of that.
Exactly. So you've got to have a story around them eating this dish or something.
He came home from a boat trip, and his good wife had it on the table ready for him to eat. And then the children gathered around him to tell me your stories, Dad. And what did you bring me on your last trip? So you turn an anchovy dish into a whole family dinner scenario.
Which I would be willing to bet money that happened in some way or somehow. She had his favorite dish one day, and then the kids a different time asked what they brought him, and he was like, "Here's some oranges." And
Absolutely, absolutely.
yeah, and that was one thing I really liked about your because it was a storytelling. I could see the story, but you also had that nonfiction piece in there.
Yeah.
And it was a cool combo.
Did you notice at the end of the book the thing I call true tales versus tall tales?
Yeah. Yep.
So for those who are listening, at the end of my book, I have an appendix, maybe a 10-page appendix. I can't remember how long it is. And in the 10-page appendix, I say, "Okay, reader, you've read the whole book. Now let me tell you what stuff was kind of out of my head." And then I would list the items that were kind of made up, and that's where the true tales versus tall tales chapter
Yeah,
comes.
I thought that was really cool because then your reader will know, like, okay, this is where he had to add. I thought that was really cool.
But I do call the book a fiction anyways, even though I separate the fact from fiction. I do call it a fiction because people aren't terribly interested in your grandpa's documentary, it's or your great grandpa's documentary. It's like, really, that's a story that's worth listening to. So I kind of made it like a fiction.
I loved it. I thought it was really cool. And I like how it spans multiple generations. I'm sure that that was challenging. We've already kind of talked about that a little bit, because you were having to fill in stories for each individual over multiple generations. But did you have to do a lot of research for this as a writer? I mean, I know you did, but
I will tell you, you're putting out a book for the public to read, and you're putting out a book that people who know the characters will
yeah.
read. And so if you put out something that is kind of not factual, you're going to get yelled at. Okay. So once I put, like I say, I put all the family stories, every single thing anchovies dish, the getting lost, the baby in the now all of a sudden I'm having a brain fart where I can't remember where the baby gets put into the before when it was being born.
Oh
It was
yeah.
put up for adoption in the
Oh, in the where the nuns are.
where the nuns are, and all of a sudden
Yeah.
the well, we'll call it the wheel where the baby's put away. Anyway, you put all those facts down, and then okay, I got to write about them. So then you have to do research. Okay,
Yeah.
it's the foundling wheel. Boy, I'm sorry about
Yes,
that.
that was it. Yeah.
The baby at the very beginning of the book, the original ancestor, came into this world with a very, very poor family, and the mother had no choice but to give the baby up. And in Sicily, they had these things called foundling wheels in the convent. And a foundling wheel was a place where you would come in the middle of the night without anybody seeing you, and you would put your baby inside this. You'd open the door, you put the baby in the foundling wheel, you'd close the door, you'd spin the wheel, ring the bell, and disappear in the middle of the night. On the other side of this wall was a bunch of nuns who would take the baby and rescue the baby and raise the baby. So I know that my ancestor was left at a foundling wheel. Okay. Let's say I knew one sentence of that. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you want to research, and there's lots of research on the internet. You want to do all kinds of logistical research, detailed research as to how that process works. And so, yes, just about everything I put in the book, I was afraid that the public would say, "You're full of baloney." So I better have good stuff in there. So just about every chapter, whenever I make any kind of a specifically strong statement about what was going on, I double checked and triple checked and quadruple checked on the internet for facts that it would support or shape the storyline.
Yeah, that was a really cool part of the story too. I think of it nowadays, if I would compare it to anything, the foundling will, to the fire department. People can drop
Yes,
babies off at the fire
yes.
department.
Very similar to that. Very similar to
Yeah,
that. And this was instigated by the church, the founding wheels. And the idea was, women were ashamed. They were given, there was a lot of shame associated with not being able to raise a child. So they would try to ditch their children. And rather than let that happen, the church said, well, let's give them an option. Let's give them a way out, a way out. And of
yeah,
course, the nuns would raise these children at the orphanage, which was my great grandfather situation. But they didn't have a lot of money, and they didn't have, and they had, if you have 50 kids and only 10 nuns, or 60 kids and only 10 nuns, you have to spread your attention amongst all of them. So they had tough times growing up in those orphanages, but at least they had a roof over their heads.
exactly. And yeah, exactly. Somewhere to go. And then, he was sent with that guy with the barrels, and I mean, not a great situation there, but he
Yeah,
learned a skill.
everybody gets apprenticed out when they reach 7 or 8 years of age, because the nuns can't afford to keep on supporting the children their whole lives. So they apprentice off the child to someone who needs help, office help or factory help, and so the child was sent off to a barrel maker to live for the rest of his young life as an apprentice to the barrel man.
Yeah. And that scene when he goes and he sees all the food where the barrel man.
Oh yeah,
Oh my gosh.
yeah. If your workers weren't fed, then they weren't going to produce. So the workers were fed pretty well. They were paid meaningless wages, but compared to what the little boy experienced in the orphan in terms of food, compared to what was at the barrel maker's barracks, night and day for him. He thought it was a feast.
He probably had a stomachache afterwards.
I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it.
So I saw somewhere, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No,
Did you
no,
want to say
I'm
something?
finished. Yes,
Okay, I saw somewhere that your story, the Brooklyn Tale, has been compared to A Tree Grows in Brooklyn and The Godfather. How do you feel about those comparisons?
well, okay. If you don't know what A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, it's kind of the story of a family who is financially challenged, living in Brooklyn, doing everything they possibly can to make ends meet. Well, that's an exact comparison
Yeah.
to, like for instance, uh, and this is a true aspect of my father's childhood. They couldn't afford new shoes. Okay,
Yep.
and the Tree Grows in Brooklyn was about poor families. They couldn't afford new shoes. Okay, so what did you do if you had holes in your shoes? Well, in the case of my grandfather and my dad would turn his shoes over to my grandfather. My grandfather would take a razor cutter, it's a device that would cut through linoleum, and
Mm.
he would kneel down on the floor. He was renting a candy store from a landlord. We had a linoleum floor, so my grandpa would kneel down on the floor and cut up a piece of linoleum with his knife in the shape of my dad's shoe, and then he would glue this thing inside my dad's shoe to make the shoes last another 6 months. So you may do however you could. Um, and a tree grows in Brooklyn is exactly like that. Okay, it's not an Italian family, but
Sure.
it's certainly a comparison. Now, as to The Godfather, even though my family were not criminals, okay, if you lived in an Italian neighborhood, you had no choice. You were exposed to what was going on in your neighborhood. Um, so if the Godfather or the gangster of the community uh, asked you to do something, you basically had to do it or you were in trouble. And there's a sequence in my book that talks about an actual fact where my grandfather was forced to allow, well, there was back in the days of prohibition, um, liquor was illegal. And so the gangsters the Italian mafia gangsters, certainly in this neighborhood, would find ways to deliver illegal alcohol to people who wanted it. And so they had these restaurants called speakeasies where alcohol could be found. But you had to keep them away from the main streets because otherwise you get in trouble with the law. So in the case of the local neighborhood mafia fella, he had a speakeasy which was in a back alley behind my grandpa's candy store. And so in order to get to his speakeasy, the only way in was to come through the front door of Grandpa's candy store, walk around, walk behind the counter, walk to the back, go through the back door into the alley, and then you could make your way to the speakeasy. And of course, my grandparents had no choice. They had to participate. Now they got money for it.
Sure.
Here's $10 a week or whatever. I don't know what the price was. They got money for it, but at the same time, if they said no, they might just disappear. So they had really no choice.
Yeah.
So there's a Godfather element to it. And in addition to that, when I watched the Godfather movie myself, and I watched the family, this is not in the ugly scenes of the Godfather, but the
Mm.
family gathered around the table eating spaghetti and passing the bread around and having a conversations. Those scenes in The Godfather, to me, were right out of my own childhood because I would go to Grandma's house every Sunday with the rest of my cousins and the rest of my uncles. And my dad had, there was 5 boys in the family. So there was a big family Sunday dinner at Grandma's house. And we'd all sit around the table that looked just like that Godfather table. Dark walls, dark furniture. It looked just like that Godfather. And the uncles would be sitting in his wife beater t-shirts.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that was my uncle. Now they didn't beat their wives. No, but nobody in my
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
there they were. Their wife beater t-shirts, gathered around the table, eating spaghetti, passing around the bread, and respect for the family. You respect for the family. This was exactly out of my childhood. So even though we did not have murders and mayhem and blood and all that stuff that the Godfather had in my family, I could very, very relate to the sequences, the family sequences in that show. It was just like my family sequences.
yep.
So
And
I
that
like
resonates with
huh?
Italian Americans. I mean, you take the mafia part out, whatever. I mean, sure that creates drama and entertainment, but that The Godfather 2 for me is my favorite. It just
Love
the
those movies.
scenes in it and the family and then the flashbacks to Ellis Island and I mean, it's and you and I are different generations, but those scenes, like when I look back at pictures of when my mom grew up, like that's what her house looked like, you know?
She relates to those movies. So I'm very pleased. I'm very proud that my books are compared that way.
Absolutely, I would be too. Yeah. So, what message do you hope that Italian Americans or really anybody take away from A Brooklyn Tell?
Okay. Well, it's first of all, the whole thing is family, 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 family. Why? Everybody should know their family story. How did you arrive here? Why are you here? What is your family all about? Um, but at the same time, that's the primary theme: family, family, family. Family is good. But you got to realize too, in the Brooklyn Tale, if you were Italian, you were a third class citizen when you first came here. You were scum. You were spit upon. And I'm not talking about today, and I'm not talking about 20 years ago. I'm
Sure.
talking about in the 1910s, 1920s. You were spit upon. You were considered dirt on the bottom of your shoe. And I'm thinking myself, I don't care who you are, whether you're black or white or Polish or German or Italian, all of us start with tough times, and it
Hmm.
all depends on how you deal with it. Uh, can you rise above it and ignore all that ugliness and make a good life for yourself? And I guess the moral of the book would be, yes, you can. You can be in that ugly place, be treated in that ugly fashion, and rise above it, and still have a great life. So it's I guess it's a book about family and a book about hope.
I love it. Yeah, that's great. What is uh a person do you have any personal stories that maybe didn't make it into the book that you'd want to share with us?
There's,
You don't
there
have
was,
to, no
there, there
pressure.
was there was one story. There was one story that is in the appendix, and I had a big fight with my son. My son was one of my editors, and I wanted to put this story in the book. No, Dad, you can't do that. No, why? It's a great story. No, Dad, so and my wife as well also agreed with him. Don't put that story in the book. Um, and I'll tell the story anyways. It's in the appendix. Basically, when I was like 6 or 7, whenever it was the age I was that I believed in Santa Claus. I believed in Santa Claus. Okay. So I was 6 years old, let's say. Um, we lived in a suburban house in Long Island, and it was a 2-story house, but the second story was never finished. The idea is you buy the house and then you do the finishing of the second story yourself, putting in floors and putting in walls. And until you do that work, that second story is no different than an attic. So in that house, we had this attic. Okay, we all lived on the first floor, and the attic had no floors. Basically, you had floorboards, risers, whatever you call it, every 18 inches, and
Oh, yeah.
in between this 18-inch risers was fiberglass, and the fiberglass would be sitting on your plasterboard, your wall board, very thin half-inch stuff that would not support the weight of any human being. Not supposed to stand on it, in other words. Anyway, Christmas time was coming, and my dad and mom had bought our Christmas gifts from Santa Claus and had put it up in the attic, which me and Gary, my brother, never went to because, it's upstairs. There's nothing to do. See upstairs. So my dad put the toys up in the attic where there's no floor. Okay. And so when it was time, we were in bed. It was time to put out the Santa Claus gifts under the Santa Claus tree. Um, Dad went upstairs to gather the toys. At the same time, a major thunderstorm was going on. So as Daddy was walking on these pieces of wood that are 18 inches apart, you put one foot on one board and another foot on the other board, and you very careful not step in the center because nothing's going to hold you up. Okay. So as he's walking along to make his way to where the toys were, the power went out from the lightning storm.
Oh,
And
no.
I forgot to add, it was late at night, and my dad kind of sleeps in the raw. My dad is not a pajamas. So here he is. in these, his birthday suit, uh, walking on these floorboards, these pieces of wood. The lights went out. He made a misstep. He stepped onto the place where there was no support or flooring, and his whole body dropped. Ceiling, okay? And so he put a big giant hole in the ceiling. He fell all the way down until his armpits stopped him, because the armpits were on either side of the
Those
board,
riser.
the risers, right? So he had an arm on either side of the risers, and the rest of his body went through the floor down below. Okay. Now this happened to be right above my mother's bed, and my mother was in the bedroom reading a book at the time, and all this big noise erupts. Okay. She's got a candle going because the lights are out. She's got a candle going, and all of a sudden, through the roof, she sees my dad in all his naked glory.
Forgot he was naked.
From his armpits down, with his feet wagging back and forth over her head, because he didn't know what to do. Okay, well, that was what my mother was surprised by. Eventually, Dad managed to pull himself out of that problem, but it left a big hole in the ceiling. Okay,
Oh my gosh.
my mother's bedroom. Now, my dad belonged to the Knights of Columbus. Okay, and of course they were a funny bunch of guys. He told them the story what happened, and so there was an artist in the Knights of Columbus who drew a cartoon of my dad hanging from the ceiling naked, and on the caption below the cartoon he wrote, "Well, you heard of jingle bells, but I never heard of jingle balls." That's a little colorful there. So it wasn't too colorful. Okay, the colorfulness of that story, combined with the fact that anybody who was 9 or 8 or 7 might read this and become aware that there is no such thing as Santa Claus. Okay, my son said, if my 7-year-old reads that and discovers there's no Santa Claus because of your book, I'm going to be so mad at you. I don't want him to read about that, because I don't want him to know there's. And besides which, who wants to talk about your dad jingle balls? That's terrible. So I had a big fight with the family over this, and they won out. I took the story out of the book. I did put it in the appendix, and then in the appendix I colored it and wrote it in such a way that a child would not necessarily, unless he was super smart, a child would not necessarily deduct from the story that there is no Santa Claus. And I didn't use the word jingle balls.
Yeah.
My book is very, 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 very G-rated, very clean, nothing offensive, nothing that anybody could possibly find offensive unless you're a nut. So my son said jingle balls was too colorful. So that is not in the book, just a description of what led up to the discussion.
Well, if your son and grandson listen to this or watch this show, tell them around like the half-hour mark, they gotta they gotta skedaddle.
My son, both of my sons are big podcast listeners. They love podcasts. And when I told them, this is my second podcast this month, the other podcast I did was for the Hannah book. And they're very, very excited. So they're looking forward to listening to your podcast. You'll have to let me know the details as to when it's broadcast.
Absolutely. Just don't let your grandson listen after that, like the half-hour mark.
Well, I think they're very, very, very close to now being of age where they're going to figure it out.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, it's not quite there yet. I mean, the youngest one, I'm certain, is not clear, but the older one probably is very, very clear about it.
Probably's got it. How many grandchildren do you have?
I have 5 grandkids. My oldest son has 2 boys, and they're well, I'll give everybody's ages in a second. My other son has 3 children. One is a girl. So the girl is the youngest. So I have a 9-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 5-year-old. Girl is the 5-year-old. And the grandkids, they live nearby. We see each other a lot. Some of them have read my book, and some of them have not, but it'll come. To tell you the truth, when I'm long gone from this earth, they will have signed copy of that book with their grandpa made. They'll know a little bit about their family history. So I'm not too worried that they haven't read it yet.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I can see your books behind you. They'll have both sides too.
Yes,
They'll have
they have both
their
sides.
family history.
Well, the oldest boy read the Hannah book. Okay, and in the Hannah book, there are a bunch of Irishmen with Irish accents up in Newfoundland, and my grandfather in Newfoundland, his favorite saying. I'm going to say it in English first. Okay, you and I might say Jesus, Mary, and Joseph when we're excited. Let's say you hit your finger with a hammer. Oh, you
Yeah.
would shout Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. But in Newfoundland, they shout Lord, thundering Jesus. But they do it with an Irish accent, so it comes out Lord, thundering Jesus. So that was in the first book, the Hannah book. When the oldest boy read the Hannah book, right after that, he spent the whole 2 weeks afterwards running around the house, Lord, thundering Jesus, Lord, thundering Jesus. So my grandkids are going to have a fun time, I think, with these stories in the book. I,
Absolutely.
I myself am not in the book. These are stories about my ancestors. I'm in the forward and about the author, but my story is not in the book at all. But they'll know my story because they lived near me.
Exactly. And then they can write your story.
You know what? Maybe I'll inspire them.
Maybe, you never know. So, are you working on any new projects, future books, anything like that?
Well, we just finished publishing a Brooklyn Tale. It's just now the first book was published by a small publisher. A Brooklyn Tale is self-published by me, um, just because I had some personal choices. I wanted to go that direction. So now, when you self-publish, you have to market. And so it's brand new books. So right now I'm in the marketing phase. All my attention is devoted to getting the word out about the book. So I don't have any future book projects in my head. I have a couple of ideas. I don't know if they'll come to fruition. But right now I'm just very pleased with getting the word out about my two novels.
Absolutely. And we'll promote it like crazy on the podcast. We'll put links and all that kind of stuff in the show notes. And
I thank you. I thank you. Let me know when it's all ready. I'd like to see what it's all about.
actually, why don't we go ahead and promote that right now? Where can listeners find your book?
Okay. The Hannah book is available at Walmart, Target, Amazon. Currently, the Brooklyn Tale book is mostly available only on Amazon, Amazon.com. It takes a while to get it processed through to other uh, places of sales, retail locations. So right now, Amazon.com, but it's there. It comes in the format of hardcover, softcover, and ebook. Eventually, I hope to make both books into audiobooks, but somehow or other that process keeps escaping me.
Great. And then how can people connect with you? Do you have social media, a
I, I,
website?
I do have social media. I have a website called lighthousehannah.com, lighthousehannah.com. And it was created when the first book was written, but the Brooklyn Tale, there's a whole portion of Brooklyn Tale attached to that website. So you can, look at Brooklyn Tale things there. I'm a huge Facebook guy.
Okay.
So you'll see both of my books on Facebook. So you can contact me on Facebook that way. I'm also TikTok, not so much on Twitter. And what's the other one that's associated?
Instagram.
Instagram. I have a little bit of Instagram, a lot more TikTok, even a lot more Facebook. So those are ways you
Perfect.
reach me. But I'm trying to do it. But at the same time, I'm a retared guy. It's kind of fun to be retired and have nothing going on. So sometimes I'm a
Absolutely.
little on the lazy side about promoting my book.
And social media, it takes a lot. It's you've got to get the photo and the links and the captions and it's a lot of work.
You have no idea. Like for instance, in connecting with you, which I am so delighted that we have,
Me
uh,
too.
I had to go through a lot of effort to connect with podcasters, and I'm so glad that you and I did connect. But just if you want to talk to one podcaster, you have to ask 100 podcasters. You have to communicate with 100 podcasters, and after you communicate with 100 of them, one very lovely person like Stephanie Denton comes up and says, "I'll work with you," and then you say, "Yay, touchdown!"
Yay! Well, I generally, like I said, I love to hear people's stories, so I'm so glad that you reached out to me.
Very good.
All right. Well, what's one piece of maybe wisdom you'd share with people who want to preserve their family story or immigrant story before we close out?
grab a hold of your dad and your mom, grab a hold of your grandparents, when if they're still alive, and say, "Hey, tell me about the family, tell me about the history." Don't don't look at your grandpa and say, "Well, he's just an old guy on the couch." You'll never know, because I'll tell you right now, I wish I had more conversations with my grandfather and with my grandmother, especially for these books. I sure we hung out together and we ate pasta together and we played bocce together, me and grandpa. But you didn't really sit there and say, "Grandpa, tell me about your childhood." You never did that.
Yeah.
And maybe your grandpa might shed a story, um, but be active. Go to your grandpa, go to your parents and say, "Hey, tell me about your family history." Because someday they'll be gone and you'll be thinking of them and you'll say, "Boy, oh boy, I wish I could remember a little bit more about grandpa or dad or mom." So yes, be proactive. That would be my piece of advice.
Absolutely. And we live in a day and age now where you can hit record and remember
Oh, I
and
have a
not
lot
have
of
to,
those.
you've got it all down.
In my mother's final years, I was her caregiver, and we would, like we would go to the store, and Dad would go inside the store, and I'd be sitting in the car with Mom waiting for Dad to finish. And I turn on my microphone on my little phone. My phone had a recorder. Every phone has a recorder. And I say, "Mom, tell me a joke." And I would, of course, 92-year-old woman telling a joke. There's a lot of hits and misses. They stumble and
Sure.
but it's still funny to watch them tell you the joke. Now, to this day, Mom's long gone. She's dead now, past 11, 12 years. I can turn that joke back on and listen to Mom tell that silly, stupid
Oh,
joke. And it brings a little kind of a emotional tear going on.
absolutely. That's amazing. Because you can hear her voice again.
Yeah, absolutely. My mother used to have, uh, she used to get emotional in her old age. It was an old age problem, but she would get emotional about stuff for no reason, irrational emotion. It happens to old folks. She would get mad at me, okay, and then I would do everything possible to stop her from getting mad at me, and she would get mad at me. So one day she comes over to the house. My dad drops her off and says, "I have something to tell you." I said, "Okay, Mom." She says, "I will never, ever, ever get mad at you again." I said, "Wait, wait, wait, Mom. Wait, wait, stop. Let me get my recorder." So I got my recorder, turned it on. "Okay, please, Mom, would you repeat what you just said to me?" And, "Donnie, I will never get mad at you again. Never, never, never will I ever get mad at you again. I love you, Donnie. It'll never happen again." I recorded that. Oh my God. Whenever I think uh, of times with my mother and it's a little nostalgic, I turn on that recording and then I start to cry. So
Oh,
reach out and hold on to your family. Do as best as you can.
it's great advice. Perfect advice to end our wonderful conversation.
Well, our conversation has been pleasant for me. So I thank you so very, very, very much for this opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you for reaching out and for being on our podcast. And we'll get your book out there so people can buy it and read A Wonderful Brooklyn Tale.
Very awesome. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.